August 4th, 1892, Fall River, Massachusetts. The scorching summer heat hangs thick in the air as Andrew Borden returns home from a brief trip into town. Still weak and queasy from a mysterious illness thought to be food poisoning, he sinks into a nap on the parlor couch of his stately home at 92 2nd Street. But his peaceful slumber is about to be shattered by violence that will echo through history. For over a century, people have debated, did Andrew's own daughter wield the axe against him and her stepmother? Or was there another killer hiding in plain sight? This is the chilling story of Lizzie Borden. Did she really take an axe? Part 2. Hey y'all, I'm Kris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for all of our friends over there in Germany. Willkommen.
Deutschland, über alles.
Did you learn that in school?
Yeah, I took 3 years of German in school.
There you go.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe to Hitched to Homicide. Then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who are just like you and love true crime can find us. I'm getting through it fast today. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. And if you want true crime with us every single day of the week, please go join our closed Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. Mm-hmm. Go to Facebook, type in H2H, In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a couple questions, you're in. Everybody's answering the questions so far. I mean, after I said, please answer the questions, y'all started answering.
I like that.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Go join.
Yeah. The most frustrating thing is to have the whole list of people waiting to get in and they won't answer the question. Just answer the question.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And we also have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee or me some caffeine. Diet Mountain Dew. I only get one a day these days. Everything else is water. Isn't that just boring?
No,
yeah.
But
you can find that link in our show notes. You can also send us a text. The link to that is at the top of our show notes where it says, send Kris and Rob a text. We love getting them.
Sure do.
Well, last week, honey, we discussed Lizzie and her upbringing, her hatred for her stepmother, and her resentment toward her father for being miserly with his money and not allowing Lizzie and her sister to live the kind of life they knew they could live.
Right.
And after Lizzie's father has given property to her stepmother, Abby's family, Abby's half-sister, and killed the pigeons that Lizzie cared for in the Borden farm, Andrew and Abby get deathly ill. So were they poisoned? We don't know. Maybe.
Right.
The next day, her uncle shows up, and while the family maid, Bridget, is out washing windows, and Lizzie's all alone in the house with her stepmother, Abby Borden. Abby Borden is hacked to death with a 3.5-inch hatchet. Mm-hmm. And when her father comes home and Bridget is laying down, she's sick too. Her father, Andrew, is also hacked to death while he's sleeping.
Right.
Lizzie's acting strange, and on the day of their funeral, the town mayor tells Lizzie, oh, by the way, you're a suspect.
You're a suspect.
Before I get started with the rest of this story, let me thank a couple sources. Rolling Stone Magazine, Murderpedia, FamousTrials.com, the Smithsonian Magazine, CrimeArchives.net, LizzieBorden.com, the Fall River Historical Society, 48 Hours, the Fall River Herald News, and many, 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 many more.
Many more.
sources, and I will have the links to all of those in the show notes.
All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
The day after Andrew and Abby's funerals, Sunday, August 7th, 1892, Bridget and Emma and Alice find Lizzie in the kitchen burning a blue dress in the stove.
Uh-oh.
They asked her what she was doing, and she said that she was getting rid of the dress because it was stained with paint and no longer usable. And Bridget and Emma weren't the only ones who saw Lizzie burn this dress. Her BFF Alice Russell also saw Lizzie quote, calmly burning the dress, end quote. Lizzie and Emma both said that the dress had been stained with paint and needed to be burned. This is the most valuable piece of evidence, but no dress and no explanation.
I think usually when you have old clothes, there's one of two things you do. You either just toss them in the trash or it goes to Goodwill. And since there wasn't a Goodwill back then, I'm thinking maybe she should have just tossed it in the trash like normal people.
But she's burning it in the stove.
Wow. Okay.
In the middle of August.
Yeah.
I keep talking about how hot it is, but yeah.
Whatever.
But witnessing the burning of the dress made her good friend Alice very anxious. And because of this, she hid the truth. Lizzie and Emma were in the kitchen when Alice, who had been staying with them during the police proceedings, noticed that Lizzie was holding this blue dress. And she asked Lizzie what she intended to do with it. And Lizzie replied that she was going to burn it because it was soiled and faded and covered in paint stains.
Mm-hmm.
But Alice wasn't buying it.
Yeah.
And then found out from Emma that the dress had only been made a few weeks before. Yeah. And it would have taken at least 2 days to sew this dress.
Lizzie.
And if it had been worn around the house, as Lizzie claimed, it couldn't have been ruined as they described. And the timing of the dress's destruction is obviously suspiciously convenient.
The other thing, too, she says there's paint on it. Does Lizzie ever do anything that requires a little bit of manual labor?
Not that I know of, except making sinkers for her fishing pole and taking care of the pigeons.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Just a day after Mayor John Coughlin informed Lizzie that the investigation was progressing and she was a prime suspect, that's when the dress is burned. The day after, right?
Yeah, right. Coincidence.
Coinky-dink.
Yep.
Alice was convinced this was a terrible idea and would only make Lizzie appear more suspicious. And when Alice confronted Lizzie about the dress, Lizzie was horrified and asked why Alice hadn't stopped her from burning it. She's like, Lizzie, why did you burn that? That just makes you look guilty. And then Lizzie was like, why didn't you stop me?
Okay.
But Alice kept the truth of the dress to herself and even lied to an investigator about it. But by her third testimony, almost a year later, she finally came clean about what she witnessed. And after she told the police the blue dress was new, and she burned it the day after the mayor told her she was a suspect, these two friends were no longer friends, and they stopped speaking to each other from that point on. 5 days after the murders and on August 9th, authorities convened an inquest in the courtroom over the police headquarters. Lizzie took the stand on each of the 3 days, and it was held in front of criminal magistrate Joshua Blaisdell. This inquest is the only time Lizzie testified in court under oath. And she's pretty full of herself and her ego because even though she had all these inconsistencies in her story, she didn't have a defense attorney during the closed inquiry. But she had her defenders. Dr. Borden came to her defense, staunchly believing that Lizzie was innocent. He testified that after the murders, he prescribed a double dose of morphine to help Lizzie sleep.
Wow.
Yeah. Its side effects, he said, would account for her confusion. You think?
Yeah,
a double dose of morphine?
Good night. It's a wonder it didn't kill her.
When they questioned Emma, she told the authorities that she and Lizzie harbored no anger toward their stepmother, but she did give confusing and contradictory answers as well. But the police interviewed the family and neighbors who said otherwise. On the day of the murders, with Emma 15 miles away on vacation, Lizzie and Bridget were the only two home with Abby Borden after Andrew left to run his errands, and Bridget was outside washing the windows when Abby was murdered on the second floor. Andrew was bludgeoned in the first floor sitting room not long after he came home, and while he was being murdered, Bridget was in her room on the third floor. Attic. She lived in the attic. As for Lizzie, well, her movements were inconsistent, and because of this inconsistency, the judge, district attorney, and police marshal determined that Lizzie was, quote, probably guilty. They arrested Lizzie on August 11th, 1 week after the murders, and charged her with a double homicide.
Wow.
The next day, on August 12th, she pled not guilty. The judge actually sent her to a county jail in Taunton, 8 miles north of Fall River, to await her day with a grand jury. And the once privileged Lizzie is now confined to a 9 by 7 foot cell, 8 miles from home, for the next 9 months.
Wow.
Now, lots of women rallied around Lizzie, including her Women's Christian Temperance Union and the suffragists. They protested at her trial that she would not be judged by a jury of her peers because women couldn't serve on juries. Now, the attorney general and the district attorney, neither one wanted to haul Lizzie's butt into court, even though they both thought she was guilty of killing her father and stepmother. There were holes in the police's evidence, so the district attorney brought the case in front of a grand jury in November of 1892. He didn't know if he was going to get an indictment or not. 23 jurors convened to hear the case on the charges of murder, and during the preliminary hearing from August 22nd and 23rd, Andrew Jennings, Lizzie's personal and family attorney from Fall River, took the lead in her defense in the beginning, but then one of Boston's most prominent defense lawyers, Melvin O. Adams, joined the family attorney to advocate for Lizzie's innocence.
Okay.
This tiny courtroom above the police station was packed with Lizzie supporters. At the preliminary hearing, Lizzie's defense attorney, Melvin Adams, attacked the prosecution's weak evidence, particularly questioning the timeline and the credibility of certain testimonies, then delivered a rousing closing argument, after which Lizzie's fans erupted into applause.
Oh, man. And then she ran for Congress. Just kidding.
They adjourned with no action. Then the grand jury reconvened on December 1st and heard some dramatic testimony because Alice Russell, the single pious 40-year-old member of the Central Congregational Church where Lizzie was a Sunday school teacher and was Lizzie's once best friend, takes the stand.
Okay.
Her moral compass was spinning like a ceiling fan on high. She comes forward to say, shortly after Andrew Borden was murdered, Lizzie sent her maid, who she called Maggie, even though her name was Bridget, to get Alice. Alice stayed with Lizzie, sleeping in the Borden house for several nights after the murders, while the bodies of Abby and Andrew were stretched out on mortician boards in the dining room.
In the middle of August.
Ugh.
Alice had testified at the inquest and the preliminary hearing and earlier before the grand jury, but she never told one of the important details. She was worried about her omission and consulted her own attorney, who said, "You need to tell the truth."
Yeah.
And on December 1st, Alice goes back to the grand jury and testified that on Sunday morning after the murders, Lizzie took a dress off the shelf in the pantry closet and burned it in the cast iron coal stove. Lizzie burned a dress a day after the funeral of her father and stepmother and a day after the mayor told her she was a suspect in her parents' murder. And Alice tells the jury that it was a dress she knew to be fairly new. 2 days later, on December 2nd, 1892, Lizzie was indicted on the charge of first-degree murder of her father, Andrew, and her stepmother, Abby. Now, again, I said Judge Josiah Blaisdell. He decided she was probably guilty.
Yeah.
And he also decided she needed to stay in jail until a state superior court trial.
It's probably not a good idea for a judge to predetermine somebody's guilt or not.
She might be guilty.
Yeah.
Then on June 5th, 1893, nearly a year after the murders, Lizzie Borden's trial began at the New Bedford Courthouse before a panel of 3 judges. And to add to the tension, another axe murder had recently taken place in Fall River,
Really?
with striking similarities to the Borden murders.
Really?
However, it was determined that the 2 incidents were unrelated, but the coincidence only intensified the public's fascination.
Yeah.
This is the O.J. Simpson trial of 1893.
If the dress doesn't fit, you must acquit.
And Lizzie sort of has the dream team of defense attorneys, Andrew Jennings and now George Robison, who was the former governor of Massachusetts.
Wow.
And Lizzie had some great witnesses to take the stand for her. A Harvard University chemist said that he found no blood on the 2 axes and 2 hatchets that the police took from the cellar at the Borden home. 2 days after the murder, Lizzie turned over her dress, but it only had a spot of blood on it, which they attributed to her menstruating. Her attorneys said that the prosecution had no murder weapon and had no bloody clothes. And as far as the prussic acid, they said Lizzie was a victim of mistaken identity. Her supporters thought that her guilt was culturally inconceivable. It's inconceivable.
With no lisp.
Right. She was a well-bred, virtuous Victorian woman, a, quote, Protestant nun, end quote,
Oh, geez.
were the words of the national president of the Temperance Union. She would never commit patricide. As far as the Borden sisters were concerned, Emma was a spinster. She'd really devoted her life to taking care of her little sister, just as she had promised her mother on her deathbed. Still, the attorney general and the district attorney dragged their feet. The attorney general bowed out of the case in April. He'd been sick, and his doctor conveniently said that he couldn't withstand the demands of this kind of trial. And in his place, he chose a district attorney from north of Boston to co-prosecute with Hosea M. Knowlton, the Bristol County District Attorney.
Okay.
His name was William H. Moody. Hosea was a highly respected attorney who really didn't want the case because all the evidence was circumstantial. He would later become the attorney general for the state of Massachusetts. As far as his assistant, William Moody, Moody went on to serve as the U.S. Attorney General, Secretary of the Navy, and eventually become a U.S. Supreme Court Justice.
Wow.
Which was something I didn't know.
Yeah.
One of the prosecutors went to go on the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Mr. Knowlton believed Lizzie was guilty, but realized the long odds against a conviction. He was convinced that he did have a duty to prosecute, and he did so. Lizzie is the only person with the motive and opportunity to kill her dad and stepmom. And at the end of this opening statement, he says he has the skulls of Abby and Andrew. And at this revelation, Lizzie faints in court. She has a sinking spell. She faints.
Yeah.
A leading New York reporter who believed in Lizzie's innocence wrote that the district attorney's eloquent appeal to the jury, quote, entitles him to rank with the ablest advocates of the day, end quote. Knowlton thought a hung jury was within his grasp. It might satisfy both those convinced that Lizzie was innocent and those who thought she was a killer.
Yeah.
If new evidence emerged, Lizzie could be retried without him. So he's kind of thinking of himself. He's like, let's just get through this.
Yeah. Let me not prove everything, and then I'm out of here.
Yeah. I mean, the attorneys around her, they're just dropping like flies. Now I'm tapping out.
Yeah.
But Lizzie's demeanor in court, which Mr. Knowlton failed to anticipate, influenced the outcome. Because in a courtroom where men reserved all the legal power, she presented herself as a helpless woman. I'm helpless. I just don't even know what to do.
How could they do this to me?
Her lawyers told her to dress in black. She appeared in court in tightly corseted dresses and flowing skirts, and she was always holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a fan in the other.
Oh, geez.
My mercy. Yeah.
Wow.
One newspaper described her as, quote, quiet, modest, and well-bred, end quote. Far from the, quote, brawny, big, muscular, hard-faced, coarse-looking girl, end quote, another newspaper had described her as.
Can you imagine if somebody today, if somebody walked in with a bouquet of flowers and a fan?
Yeah.
It'd be like,
I want somebody to do it just so we can witness it, so we can watch it happen.
Yeah. Wow.
Another reporter stressed that she lacked, quote, Amazonian proportions, end quote. She could not possess the physical strength, let alone the moral degeneracy, to wield a weapon with skull-cracking force, end quote. But with her father gone, she and Emma are now in possession of $10 million. So Lizzie had 5 million reasons to get rid of her father and her stepmother.
Sure.
And Lizzie can now afford the best legal team to defend her, including this former Massachusetts governor. And he had appointed one of the 3 justices who were going to preside over the case.
Jeez.
And that justice, well, hang on, we're going to talk about him in a little bit.
All right.
The justices took other actions. They refused to allow the prussic acid incident to be included in the prosecution's evidence. So they couldn't say, hey, she didn't just kill him. She thought about poisoning them first. All of that was left out of the trial.
Why weren't they allowed to use that?
Just didn't let them do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Throughout the trial, the most significant issues were the potential murder weapon and Lizzie Borden's whereabouts during the murders. Her story continued to be inconsistent and didn't add up. The hatchet found in the basement was presented as a possible murder weapon, but forensic tests, I don't know what kind of forensic tests they were doing, showed no traces of blood on it.
They had a big magnifying glass.
I mean, what were they doing? Yeah. Moody opened the state's case, and when he carelessly threw Lizzie's blue dress on the prosecution table during his speech, it revealed the skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden.
Wow.
Yeah. And Lizzie, she couldn't take it, and they had to get the court back. It took a few minutes to get the court back together again, because not only was Lizzie upset, everybody, all the spectators were like, what?
Well, at least Lizzie, showed some emotion.
She did. Yeah.
She hadn't done that before.
She did.
Yeah.
But Moody wanted to demonstrate the brutality of their deaths and to suggest the hatchet, which he pulled out of a bag as the weapon. This display shocked the public, especially those in Fall River. And, Lizzie's like over there fanning herself.
Yeah.
They brought out all the witnesses from the Borden home on August 4th, 1892, the most important of who was 26-year-old Bridget Sullivan, who testified that Lizzie was the only person she saw in the home at the time her parents were murdered. She did help the defense when she testified she had not witnessed during her over 2 years of service to the family any signs of the rumored ugly relationship between Lizzie and her stepmother. Quote, everything was pleasant. Lizzie and her mother always spoke to each other, end quote. But Hannah Gifford, who made a garment for Lizzie a few months before, this is the cloak maker,
right?
She described a conversation in which Lizzie called her stepmother, quote, a mean, good-for-nothing thing. Remember?
Yeah. Yep.
And she said, quote, I don't have much to do with her. I stay in my room most of the time, end quote. Bridget Sullivan also testified that Andrew and Abby Borden experienced stomach pains on the day before the murder and told jurors at the presumed time of Abby's murder, Bridget claimed she was washing windows outside. And she testified that she opened the door for Andrew Borden after he returned home from his walk around town and then described hearing Lizzie's cry for help a few minutes after 11 o'clock. Now, several witnesses described seeing Andrew Borden all through town, and then they know that this household guest, John Morse, who's age 60, he says, yeah, he was in town, I was in town, and I had breakfast in the Borden home on the morning of the murders, and then I left the house. So he's saying, yes, Andrew left, I left, we kind of left at the same time.
Right.
Everybody saw him in town.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. Was there any kind of neighbor or whatever that saw Andrew come home?
Yes.
Okay.
The next door neighbor saw him come home.
Okay, so what time would that have been?
It was, I said this in the last podcast, and I want to say it was between 9:30 and 10.
Okay, so, and do we know what time she cried for help?
Well, Bridget says that she was laying upstairs in her room and remembered hearing the city clock chime 11.
Okay, so there would be ample time for her to help her father off with a coat and him to lie down and her to come in and kill him and then cry for help.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
Yeah.
I rest my case, Your Honor.
The next set of witnesses described events and conversations after they discovered the bodies. Dr. Seabury Bowen, Seabury, that's his first name.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Borden family physician, summoned to the home by Lizzie in the late morning of August 4th, recounted Lizzie's story about looking for lead sinkers in the barn and her contention that her father's troubles with his tenants probably had something to do with the murders. Then on cross-examination, Dr. Bowen agreed with the defense's suggestion that the morphine he prescribed for Lizzie might account for some of the confused and contradictory testimony she gave at the inquest following the murders.
Okay.
Now, Adelaide Churchill, the Borden's neighbor and another important witness, remembered Lizzie wearing a light blue dress with a diamond figure on it, but didn't recall seeing any blood spots on it. John Fleet, the assistant marshal of Fall River, recalled his interview with Lizzie shortly after the murders. She corrected him and testified when he called Abby Borden her mother, quote, "She was not my mother, sir. She was my stepmother. My mother died when I was a child," end quote. The most compelling testimony, of course, came from Alice Russell when she described her visit from Lizzie the night before the murders, in which she would announce that she would soon be going on vacation and felt, quote, "that something is hanging over me. I cannot tell what it is," end quote. Then, according to Alice, after describing her parents' severe stomach sickness, Lizzie said, quote, "I feel afraid something is going to happen," end quote. Alice told the court that Lizzie, quote, "wanted to go to sleep with one eye open half the time for fear someone might burn down the house or hurt her father because he was so discourteous to people," end quote. Turning his questioning to the Sunday after the murders, District Attorney Moody asked Alice about the dress burning incident. Alice recounted that when she asked Lizzie what she was doing with the blue dress, she replied, quote, "I'm going to burn this old thing up. It is covered with paint," end quote. On cross-examination, defense attorney George Robison attempted through his questioning to suggest that a guilty person seeking to destroy incriminating evidence would be unlikely to do it in such an open fashion as Lizzie allegedly did. So they're saying, so what? She burned this dress. She burned it in front of a bunch of people. If she was really guilty, she wouldn't have burned it. She would have done it in private. She would have just burned the dress and not let anybody see her do it.
Well, the other question I would have asked, too, from a prosecution standpoint is, okay, where'd that paint come from? Did anyone bother to ask her about that?
Yeah, what were you painting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Alice also recounted the conversation with Lizzie about the note on the day of the murders, where Lizzie said that she received a note from a messenger on that morning, summoning Abby to visit a sick friend. Lizzie used the note to explain why she thought her mother had left the home and therefore didn't think to look for her body after discovering her dad. And despite a thorough search of the Borden home, the alleged note was never found. Alice said she sarcastically suggested to Lizzie that her mother might have burned the note, and Lizzie, according to Alice, replied, "Yes." Quote, "Yes, she must have. That's what happened," end quote.
Once again, that's the ticket?
That's the ticket. The state claimed that the reason no one ever found the handle of the murder weapon was that Lizzie had burned the shaft because it was covered in blood. Of course, this was impossible to prove. The defense also pointed out how clean the hatchet head had been and how unrealistic it would have been for Lizzie to wash the murder weapon and hide her bloody clothes in the few minutes between killing Andrew Borden and calling for Bridget Sullivan.
Okay.
And officers who initially found the hatchet reported different accounts of seeing a wooden handle next to it. And despite attempts to connect the hatchet to the murders, there was no conclusive evidence linking it to the crime. When the state argued that maybe Lizzie committed the crime in the nude, the defense laughed. The theory, they were like, "You got to be kidding me."
Yeah, that's that one. That's a little far-fetched.
And then they went on to say Lizzie is considered a respectable lady.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecution rested its case on June 14th after one final defeat. The state wanted to have druggist Eli Bentz recount for the jury his story of Lizzie Borden visiting the drugstore the day before the murders and asking for the poison. But that was out of the question because the judges had already said,
right,
this is off the table.
They already
Can't
ruled
do it.
on that, yeah.
Right. The defense made its case using mainly the state's own witnesses. The defense kept hammering at the contradictory testimony of key prosecution witnesses. The defense also explored holes in the prosecution case where the defense asked, is the handle that supposedly broke off from the axe head that the state hauled into court and claimed was part of the murder weapon? And the state had no answer. Is this part of the murder weapon? And the state's like, no, we can't say yes or no.
Yeah.
The defense also exploited the government's own timeline, which allowed from 8 to 13 minutes between Andrew Borden's murder and Lizzie's call to Bridget Sullivan.
There it is.
Robison tried to suggest the difficulty of washing blood off one's person, clothes, and murder weapon of blood. and then hiding the murder weapon all within that short span of time. So he's saying exactly the opposite of you. You're saying she had time. He's saying she didn't have time.
Well, and too, now that I know he's saying 13 minutes. Yeah, that's a little tough.
Lizzie's lawyers also found witnesses who had seen a suspicious character in the vicinity of the Borden house and a handyman who'd been working in the loft shortly before the crimes, calling the police's evidence into question. Andrew Borden was one of the wealthiest men in Fall River with an estate worth about $10 million by today's standards. Anybody could have killed him. Witnesses Charles Gifford and Uriah Kirby reported seeing a strange man near the Borden house around 11 o'clock on the night before the murders. Dr. Benjamin Handafy testified that he saw a pale-faced young man on the sidewalk near 92 2nd Street around 10:30 on August 4th. People are walking up and down the street, by the way. They live just right outside of the business district.
Yeah, right.
A plumber and a gas fitter testified in the day or two before the murders, they had been in the Borden's barn loft, casting doubt on police assertions that Lizzie's alibi was suspect because dust in the loft appeared to be undisturbed. So they're saying, well, you're lying. The dust, it can't be undisturbed because these other guys were in there 2 days beforehand.
Right.
Emma Borden, the older sister of Lizzie, was the defense's most anticipated witness. Emma testified that Lizzie and her father enjoyed a good relationship. She told jurors that the gold ring found on the little finger of Andrew Borden's body was given to him 10 or 15 years ago by Lizzie when she was a little girl, and he prized it highly. Emma also insisted that relations between Lizzie and her stepmother were cordial, even as she admitted to the lingering resentment that she had herself over the transfer of the property by her father to Abby's half-sister.
Half-sister, right.
The defense had also hoped that Emma might testify that the Bordens had a custom of disposing of remnants and pieces of dresses by burning them.
It's a family custom.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But the court ruled the evidence inadmissible.
Yeah. Well, at least they gave him that.
Summing things up for the defense, A.V. Jennings argued, quote, "There is not one particle of direct evidence in this case from beginning to end against Lizzie Borden. There is not a spot of blood. There is not a weapon that they can have connected with her in any way, shape, or fashion," end quote.
Yeah, there's no shred of evidence because, well, it's all burnt.
It's been gone. It's burned. We burned it to ashes.
Man.
Following Jennings, Governor Robison, in his closing speech for the defense, insisted that the crime must have been committed by a maniac or a devil, not by someone with the respectable background of his client. He said the state had failed to meet its burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that it was physically impossible for Lizzie, without the help of someone else, to have committed the crime within the timeline suggested by the prosecution. Robison ridiculed the theory that Lizzie might have avoided getting blood spots on her clothes by killing her parents while, quote, stark naked, end quote, and argued that the murders might well have been committed by an intruder who passed out of the house undetected. But the most important moment in the trial might have come when the three-judge panel consisting of Chief Justice Albert Mason, Judge Caleb Blodgett, and Judge Justin Dewey, who we're going to talk about him in a little bit. They ruled that Lizzie Borden's inquest testimony, full of contradictions and implausible claims, could not be submitted into evidence by the prosecution.
These judges later became SEC referees.
SEC refs, they were. Foul, called foul.
Yeah, he touched him. It's
foul. It's a foul.
Sorry.
We're deep into March Madness.
Yeah, exactly.
The reason they did this was because the judges said that Lizzie they were charging her with murder, and she didn't have an attorney with her. And everything that she was saying was not voluntary. And Lizzie should have been warned, the judges said, that she had a right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to shut her trap.
And Miranda hadn't been born yet.
No, but they're just saying, Yeah. The judges rejected the state's argument that Lizzie was only a suspect, not a prisoner at the time of this inquest, and that Anyway, her statement should be admitted because it was in the nature of a denial rather than a confession. And finally, the jury itself presented the prosecution with a formidable hurdle. Fall River was excluded from the jury pool, which was thus tilted to the county's small, heavily agriculture towns. So these are farmers.
Yeah.
Half the jurors were farmers. The others were tradesmen. One owned a metal factory in New Bedford. Most were practicing Protestants, some with daughters that were Lizzie's age. And before they went back to deliberate, Justice Dewey instructed the jury favorably toward Lizzie. His charge emphasized reasonable doubt. Before he sends them back, he goes, I want you to think about reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt, making the case for the jury to convict Lizzie pretty difficult. They were like, you can't just say, well, I think it happened.
Right.
If you've got any little bit of doubt, you've got to say that she's innocent. This is the judge.
Yeah.
According to one newspaper report, had the judge, quote, been the senior counsel for the defense making the closing plea on behalf of the defendant, he could not have been more absolutely pointed out the folly of depending upon the circumstantial evidence alone, end quote. So the paper was just basically saying he should have just joined the defense. Yeah. It was, the newspaper said, a, quote, remarkable charge, a plea for the innocent, end quote. Justice Dewey told jurors they should take into account Lizzie's exceptional Christian character, which entitled her to every inference in her favor. She's a good Christian girl. So you need to take that into account as you all go back there, jury.
Wow.
How long do you think the jury deliberated?
Oh, probably 5 minutes.
An hour.
Yeah.
An hour of discussion. After that, they reached a decision. The clerk asked the foreman of the jury, quote, what is your verdict, end quote? And he said, quote, not guilty, end quote.
Wow.
The defense had successfully stopped the key prosecution witnesses from testifying and had painted Lizzie as a virtuous woman incapable of this type of massacre. Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it only took that jury of 12 men just an hour
Wow.
before they said Lizzie Borden is not guilty.
Amazing.
When the foreman says not guilty, Lizzie lets out a yell, and then she sank into her chair. Then she rested her hands on a courtroom rail, and she put her face in her hands, and then let out a second cry for joy. Soon, Emma, her counsel, and courtroom spectators were rushing to congratulate Lizzie. She hid her face in her sister's arms and announced, quote, now take me home. I want to go to the old place and go at once tonight, end quote. Her happiness was reflected by much of the media. The New York Times reported, quote, it will be with a certain relief to every right-minded man or woman who has followed the case that the jury at New Bedford has not only acquitted Miss Lizzie Borden of the atrocious crime with which she was charged, but has done so with promptness that was very significant, end quote. This is the New York Times.
Wow.
So while it's fair to say the state failed to prove Lizzie's guilt, it's also fair to say that the all-male jury was probably influenced by certain attitudes of the day. She was a woman, right? They couldn't believe a woman like Lizzie, a Sunday school teacher from a wealthy family, would commit such a horrible crime.
Right.
Lizzie walked out of the courtroom a free woman, and the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden are unsolved to this day. After the trial, Lizzie put her father's money to good use, buying a house in an upper-class neighborhood with her sister. And unlike her previous digs, Lizzie's new home, which she called Maplecroft, came equipped with 4 bathrooms. This, according to the New York Times.
Man.
Now, as you might imagine, after Lizzie's acquittal, the courtroom is filled with all these women who are there to cheer her on.
Right.
And as much as everyone is like, this is a good thing that Lizzie is not being prosecuted for this, she's not going to be held accountable for this. There was a condemnation of the police in Fall River.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're saying that, and even the New York Times editorialist blasted, quote, the vanity of ignorant and untrained men charged with the detection of crime, end quote. Yeah.
But also, during this era, there probably wasn't that many women murderers. So And especially in this town, I can imagine the police were just in way over their heads.
They were in over their heads.
Yeah.
But they're getting it from all sides.
Sure.
They're getting it from the town. Now they're getting it from the New York Times,
Right.
who said, quote, "The unusual, inept, and stupid and muddle-headed sort that such towns manage to get for themselves," end quote. So not only they're like, you bungled it and you're idiots.
Yeah. But
Now,
you got that going for you.
But you got that going for you.
Which is nice.
Now, did Lizzie kill her parents? Probably.
Yeah.
I watched a 48 Hours episode where they hired jury consultants to pick people who, if you can believe this, had never heard of the Lizzie Borden case.
They were 8?
No, these are like grown adults who had never heard about Lizzie Borden.
Really?
Yeah.
Good grief.
There was a prosecutor and a defending attorney, and they argued out the facts that we know with their own experts. And in the end, what they came up with was a hung jury. They all believed that she did it, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt.
Wow.
So now Lizzie Borden is free, but her life is altered forever. 2 months after the incident, these two sisters move into their huge Victorian house on the hill. And all these people, even though she's been acquitted, there are lots of people in town and in the Central Congregational Church that didn't want to have anything to do with Lizzie. They shunned her.
Sure.
And Lizzie became Fall River's novelty. She's followed around in the streets by kids, and she's stared down in public. And there was that notorious jump rope rhyme about Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks.
Right.
She became a recluse and stayed in her home. But even there, neighborhood kids pestered Lizzie with pranks, egging the house and throwing rocks at it. 4 years after her acquittal, a warrant was issued for her arrest in Providence. She was charged with shoplifting.
Wow.
And apparently made restitution. So she's still doing the 5-finger discount.
Jeez.
Lizzie enjoyed traveling to Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C., dining in style and attending the theater. And although the word, quote, lesbian, end quote, was not in the vernacular yet, the idea of a so-called, what's called a, quote, Boston marriage, end quote, between two unmarried women had been introduced. And Lizzie may have been a lesbian. In a report of the trial, she is characterized as, quote, masculine, end quote. The record shows that she socialized with prominent lesbian and bisexual women after the murders. In 1904, she met the well-known bisexual actress Nance O'Neill, whose real name was Gertrude Lamson, but was known professionally as Nance. She was an American stage and film actress who performed in plays and theaters around the world, but she worked mostly in the United States.
Okay.
At the height of her career, she was promoted on theater bills and in period trade publications and newspapers as the American Bernhardt. Lizzie meets Nance at a summer resort, and they become friends. Generous, as always, Lizzie paid Nance's debts and even accompanied her through court proceedings brought by Nance's creditors. In 1905, Lizzie hosted a week-long house party for Nance and her theater company in the home that she and Emma shared. And it was after this that Emma moved out of the house and permanently becomes estranged from Lizzie. They never speak again or see each other again.
Wow.
She gave this explanation, quote, "The happenings at the French Street house that caused me to leave, I must refuse to talk about. I did not go until conditions became absolutely unbearable. Then before taking action, I consulted the Reverend Buck, who had for years been the family's spiritual advisor. After carefully listening to my story, he said it was imperative that I should make my home elsewhere. I do not expect ever to set foot in the place while she lives," end quote.
Wow.
By 1906, Lizzie was turning up in the home of Boston author and philanthropist Annie Fields, who was partners with Sarah Orne Jewett. Jewett and Fields had a wide circle of New England women friends who were also living in Boston marriages. They were lesbians. Over the years, numerous theories and speculations have emerged trying to make sense of the motivations behind the murders and the unusual behavior of Lizzie. One theory, well, a forbidden love affair between Lizzie and Bridget. Another, that Lizzie was completely disassociated at the time of the murders. Why? Because she was the victim of psychological and emotional damage. Another theory, that Lizzie suffered a seizure caused by menstruation, and this caused her to black out and chop up her father. That's some PMS for you, man.
Holy cow.
There's a theory that there was sexual abuse within the family, particularly involving Lizzie. Again, there's no definitive proof of this, but the family dynamics and Lizzie's behavior, such as nailing her bedroom door shut, apparently, have led to some considering this as a possible motive for the murders. Another, John Morse, the uncle, was the killer. He'd given police a perfectly over-detailed alibi of his whereabouts during the murders of Andrew and Abby. In his alibi, John said he was on a streetcar with 7 priests.
Yeah. But hey, I'm going to defend him here, though. I mean, if you got on a streetcar and there's 7 priests there, you probably go, wow, there's 7 of them there. How'd that happen? So, okay, I can buy that.
Well, when the police questioned the conductor, he confirmed that indeed 7 priests were passengers on his streetcar that day.
There you go.
Another Lizzie Borden author has suggested that Andrew had an illegitimate son named William who murdered his father after he refused to give him money. What I haven't told you is that after the trial and acquittal, Lizzie changed her name to Lizbeth.
Okay.
However, all this money and her new name, she could never fully escape the shadow of suspicion and public scrutiny.
Yeah.
And the people of Fall River were beyond divided in their opinions of whether she was guilty or she wasn't guilty. Both sisters died in 1927. Lizzie first of pneumonia on June 1st, 1927, a year after a year of health problems, I should say. Mm-hmm. She was 66 years old. No one attended her funeral. Her sister Emma died 9 days later in a New Hampshire nursing home. Emma was 76.
Wow.
They were buried in the same plot as their father and stepmother, the family plot at Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River. Emma died a spinster. She never got married. When Lizzie dies, the bulk of her estate is divided between her friends and a nurse that was later never married. And so it was just basically a bunch of women, a spinster school teacher, a single adult woman, 5 of whom had supported her through her trial. She gave away her money to these women that had always supported her.
Why can't I find a friend like that?
Well, I think maybe they were more than friends.
Yeah.
As for Bridget, she got the sympathy of the police. They were working class. She was working class. They even found her a job after Lizzie is taken to jail, working for a jail keeper.
Oh.
And they protected her from any guilty glances she may have received from people. And the jurors were all working class people too, so they all sympathized with her. But other than Lizzie, she was the only person that was home that day when Abby and Andrew were killed. She moved to Montana, telling people that she worked for someone in the East that was tried for murder. She never told him the name. She lived in Montana quietly and eventually married, reportedly changing her name from Bridget Sullivan to Bridget Sullivan. That's right. She married a man named John Sullivan.
Oh, jeez. Did they check that family tree?
She's Bridget Sullivan.
Man.
Yeah. She just stayed away from public attention, and she rarely discussed this murder. She passed away in Butte, Montana in 1948, carrying whatever secrets she knew about the Borden household to her grave. She's quoted as saying she never told an untruth about that day, but what did she leave out? Because after moving to Montana and marrying a man named Sullivan, she called for her very good friend and fellow Irish immigrant, Minnie Green, to see her on her deathbed. And this visit with Bridget was later shared with a librarian in Butte, Montana. So get this.
Okay.
Bridget thinks she's dying.
Right.
She calls Minnie to her bedside and tells Minnie she had worked for the Bordens at the time of the murders.
Okay.
A crime about which Minnie knew nothing. And Bridget said she liked Lizzie and often took her part during the troubles occurring in the Borden household. She took her side.
Right.
She said, quote, she helped Lizzie out at the trial, end quote, and that she had been less than candid.
Really?
Bridget was too ill for Minnie to press for any more details, and when she visited Bridget again, Bridget was feeling better and refused to discuss the matter.
Huh.
And she got a promise from Minnie that she would never reveal what she had been told. And Minnie Green kept that promise until after Bridget died, and it was then when an old lady, Miss Green, stopped at the Butte Library to obtain books about a, quote, real murder, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on that day that Minnie Green told the librarian about her visit with Bridget. So Bridget knew more than she was saying.
So did she ever say what Bridget said?
No, just that she had helped Lizzie out.
Wow.
Yeah. The Borden house at 92 2nd Street still stands in Fall River. It's a bed and breakfast, and yes, you can spend the night there and even in the room where Abby Borden was murdered.
Nice.
And of course, it's haunted. Guests and staff have reported sightings of shadowy figures and full-bodied apparitions resembling the Bordens.
Hey, honey, our anniversary's coming up. You want to take a trip?
Let's go to the Lizzie Borden house. Many have heard footsteps, whispers, and other sounds without identifiable sources. Some visitors have experienced sudden cold spots, feelings of being touched, or an unseen presence nearby. In 2019, the paranormal investigation team from the TV show Kindred Spirits conducted an investigation at the Lizzie Borden house. They aimed to connect with spirits in the home, particularly focusing on the room where Abby Borden was murdered. The house was featured in an episode of Haunted Encounters, where investigators reported unexplained activities, including interactions with entities believed to be connected to the Borden family. Visitors who stayed there have shared personal accounts of paranormal experiences. For instance, some have reported hearing children's laughter and seeing objects move on their own and feeling an unshakable sense of being watched. Now, the children's laughter is possibly from the house next door, where a mother drowned her children.
What's going on in this town?
What's going on?
Jeez.
Residents and former neighbors have also recounted eerie occurrences, suggesting that the paranormal activity may extend beyond the Borden property. So did she do it? And how did she keep all the blood off of her? Because there would be cast off from the 19 hatchet wounds on her stepmother and the 11 to her father.
Yeah.
She probably did. But we're never going to really know the whole story.
Right.
And now we kind of know that Bridget was involved more than she said.
Yeah.
But that is the unsolved case of the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden and the story of Lizzie. Did she take an axe? Who could say at this point? But that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kaiwolf project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
All right, well, here's my take on the whole thing.
Okay.
Yes, she did it. Okay, let's do a little bless your heart.
Yeah, she did it. I think she did it. For sure she did it.
Yeah.
I just don't know how she did it.
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
She definitely killed them.
Yeah.
But how?
Right.
Obviously with this hatchet, obviously.
Right.
And I think it's funny that, they say Lizzie Borden took an axe. It was actually a hatchet. Gave him mother 40 whacks.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't, she got 19 and then the dad got 11.
Yeah.
But none of that rhymes.
Well, and the other thing too, the fact that she had this all-star defense team.
She did.
Against a local prosecutor.
The best money could buy.
Yeah. I mean, those guys didn't have a chance from the very beginning.
Well, and one of the guys who was representing her had appointed one of the judges.
Yeah, exactly.
And he also said, the one judge, before he sent him back, said, she's a Christian woman.
Yeah.
Makes me think of Dolly Parton when she says, I've got fried chicken made by Christian women. Lizzie Borden made that chicken.
Yeah. Well, we'll never know the exact truth.
We will never know. Never know. And you know what? It's so frustrating because there's so many theories out there. I mean, there's a lot more theories about the Uncle John guy.
Yeah. But here's the thing. The house was locked up.
Yeah.
It was always locked up. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden the back screen door was open.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And what about Lizzie, laughing at the top of the stairs when she's just 15 feet away from her dead stepmother?
Yeah.
Was she laughing because her dad was home and she'd killed her? Was she giddy because she'd killed her stepmother?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who could say? Who could say?
All right. Well, only Lizzie knows, and I'm sure it's really hot. It's probably hotter there than it was in August when she killed her parents.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. Number one, I'm calling Put the Seat Down.
Put the candle back.
Only MC Hammer and a few other people in history of the world have been successful enough to enjoy the pleasure of pooping on a golden toilet.
What?
The desire to perform such an act of defecation must have really been weighing on 4 men in the UK. Well, that or the $6 million golden toilet would cost.
Oh, my gosh.
Yep. According to a report earlier,
nobody's ass is that precious.
I know. 4 men were charged in the theft of an 18-karat gold-plated toilet. The toilet was stolen from Blenheim Palace in the UK, where British leader Winston Churchill was born.
Did Winston Churchill sit on a golden toilet? I'm going to say no.
I'm going to say no. The toilet was part of an art installation because it actually was an artwork titled America, intended to make a statement about excessive wealth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
The golden toilet was fully functioning, and before the heist, visitors could book an appointment to actually use it.
You could book an appointment to use the toilet?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. The scary thing was it was just in an open room where everybody else was. No, I'm kidding. When the thieves removed it, they caused significant damage and flooding to the building. So, yeah, that was kind of a disaster from the very beginning.
We've sunk to a new low. I'm not even going to say bless their hearts. Not at all.
Well, you know what they call that? They call it a show. You know what I'm trying to say. Okay, number 2.
It's a shit show.
Number 2, apropos.
Okay.
A 41-year-old man in Florida was arrested for DUI earlier this month, and he was wearing a T-shirt that fit the moment perfectly.
What did it say?
Well, according to this report, a 41-year-old James Ricks Jr. was being pulled over by a Marion County sheriff for going almost 90 in a 45-mile-an-hour zone.
That's a reason to be pulled over.
Yep. The deputy turned on his emergency light and tried to pull over Ricks, but Ricks fled the deputy and attempted to evade him by turning off the lights in his truck. Well, that trick didn't work, and the deputy caught up to him.
Okay.
Once out of the vehicle, Ricks failed some field sobriety tests.
Of course he did.
And was arrested with DUI.
Okay.
But what the kicker is, you can see the arrest video, and he is wearing a shirt that said, "I'm the reason the beers are always gone." There you go. Once again, very apropos. All right, number 3, and finally. Well, that'll change his mind.
Okay.
Not. Prescott police arrested a woman that drove 2 hours to shoot her estranged husband in his bed, all because she did not want to get a divorce. The woman must not, I can't even get through this. The woman must not have been a great shot because the man, who was 80 years old, was shot in the wrist.
Holy cow. She just wanted to graze him. Just graze him.
She just missed him. According to reports, when officers arrived, the woman told them she had arrived at around midnight, then entered the residence and shot the man. Not sure what the logic behind this move is, but she claimed she did it because she didn't want a divorce anymore.
She didn't want to be a divorcee. She wanted to be a widow.
There you go. The man said the two argued, and he said she still wants the divorce, and that's when she shot him. There was a small struggle, and the man pushed her down and got the gun away before going to the neighbors to call 911.
This is a spry 80-year-old.
Man. The man was rushed to the hospital before being airlifted to Phoenix for medical treatment, which I can imagine. I mean, shot in the wrist. It's probably got an artery. Okay. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess, and I'm going to say he probably still wanted a divorce and the marriage is over.
Yeah, I'm going to say it was over, too.
Yeah, so that's my guess. So there's your bless your heart.
And I think that he probably went by, he was probably airlifted to see a hand surgeon so he could still use his hand. That's my guess.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh, Lord. So there you go.
I'm the reason all the beers are gone.
That's my favorite. Oh, my gosh.
Well, if you're the reason all the beers are gone.
Yep.
Or if you know somebody who is the reason all the beers are gone and they need their heart blessed, all you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu. And while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Please do.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.